She texted, "I'm pregnant, not yours." I replied, "Congrats," blocked her, and threw a paternity party for my actual kid with someone who stayed. The message came through while I was reviewing client portfolios at my desk, another routine Tuesday that would have been completely ordinary if my ex-girlfriend hadn't decided to detonate a manipulation bomb into my peaceful life. Riley, who I dated for 3 tumultuous years during and after college, had sent a photo of a positive pregnancy test followed by words that still make me laugh at their sheer audacity. "We need to talk. I'm pregnant and you might be the father." I stared at the message for exactly 3 seconds before the timeline hit me like a freight train carrying basic mathematics. We'd broken up 8 months ago after I finally got tired of her constant lies about everything from where she'd been to how much money she'd spent to whether she'd actually applied for the jobs she claimed to want. 8 months ago, when I discovered she'd been telling our mutual friends I was controlling for asking her to contribute to groceries while she spent $300 on skincare products she saw influencers promoting. The same Riley who once convinced me to lend her $1,500 for emergency car repairs that turned out to be a weekend trip to Miami with her girlfriends, complete with Instagram stories she forgot to hide from me showing her drinking cocktails by the pool. I'd spent 3 years with someone who treated truth like a suggestion and commitment like a temporary convenience, watching her manipulate situations to always land on her feet while everyone else dealt with the consequences of her choices. She had this way of making her problems become everyone else's emergencies, turning her poor planning into other people's obligations, her mistakes into reasons why she deserved sympathy and financial support. But here's what made her message particularly ridiculous beyond the obvious math problem. I've been with Emma for 6 months now, and we're expecting our first child together in exactly 2 months. Emma, who works as a pediatric nurse at the Children's Hospital and actually shows up when she says she will, who splits every dinner check without making it a political statement, who asks about my day because she actually cares about the answer rather than waiting for her turn to talk. Emma, who's currently 7 months pregnant with a daughter we've already named Lily, whose nursery we spent last weekend painting soft yellow because we wanted it to be perfect for our little girl. Emma, who never once asked me to pay for something she couldn't afford herself, who planned our budget together like an actual partner instead of treating me like her personal funding source. I looked at Riley's text again, did some basic math that apparently she'd either failed to consider or was hoping I wouldn't bother with, and typed back the only response that made sense: "Congrats." Then I blocked her number, screenshot the conversation for my own records, and went back to planning the gender reveal party Emma and I had been organizing for next weekend. Some people never change, but smart people learn to stop giving them opportunities to prove it over and over again. Blocking Riley should have been the end of it, but I underestimated her determination to drag me into whatever mess she'd created this time. 3 days after I'd blocked her number, my coworker Jake mentioned that some woman had been calling our office asking for me, claiming it was a family emergency, but refusing to leave her name. Then Emma showed me a friend request from an account called Riley_needs to talk, with a profile picture of an ultrasound image and a message that made my blood pressure spike. "Noah, I know you blocked me, but this is important. We need to discuss our situation like adults." Our situation, like there was some shared responsibility between us 8 months after she'd walked out of my life. I screenshot everything and showed Emma, who'd initially been supportive of my decision to ignore Riley entirely but was starting to look concerned as the messages escalated. "Maybe you should just talk to her once," Emma suggested while folding tiny baby clothes we'd bought for Lily. "Find out what she actually wants and then tell her to leave us alone." But I knew Riley better than that, knew that any engagement would be seen as an opening to manipulate the situation further. Instead, I called my brother Lucas, who'd just finished his first year as a family law attorney and had been itching for a chance to use his legal training on something more exciting than drafting wills. "Document everything," Lucas told me immediately. "Screenshots, dates, times, any witnesses to her behavior. If she's harassing you at work, that's a problem we can solve legally." Lucas was right to be concerned because Riley's campaign was just getting started. She began showing up at my workplace under the pretense of offering freelance photography services to our marketing department, a legitimate business inquiry that gave her an excuse to be in the building while asking everyone she met if they knew Noah from accounting. My boss pulled me aside after the third incident, explaining that while Riley hadn't technically done anything wrong, her obvious focus on locating me was making other employees uncomfortable. That's when I realized she wasn't just desperate. She was strategic, using her professional credentials to access places where she could make scenes about my supposed abandonment of my responsibilities. Emma and I were having dinner at our favorite restaurant when I spotted Riley's friend Sophia across the room, clearly watching us and taking photos with her phone. I excused myself, walked over to her table, and asked directly what was going on. "Riley's really struggling," Sophia said, looking genuinely conflicted. "She says you won't even talk to her about the baby." "What baby, Sophia? Do the math. We broke up 8 months ago." Sophia's face changed, confusion replacing the righteous anger she'd walked in with. "But she said you two had been seeing each other recently. That you'd been trying to work things out." That's when I realized the full scope of Riley's manipulation. She wasn't just lying to me, she was lying to everyone in our social circle about our relationship timeline. I pulled out my phone and showed Sophia the photos Emma and I had been posting for months, our relationship clearly documented since January, Emma's pregnancy announcement from 2 months ago. "Riley's been telling people we were still involved?" "She said it was complicated. That you were confused about what you wanted." Sophia stared at the evidence on my phone, her face cycling through disbelief and embarrassment. "Noah, if what you're showing me is true, then Riley has been lying to all of us." I left Sophia with a lot to think about and went home to find Emma stress-eating ice cream while researching pregnancy complications caused by emotional stress. "This has to stop," she said firmly. "I can't handle wondering when Riley's going to show up next or what lies she's going to spread about us." That night, I made 2 decisions. First, I was going to find out exactly what Riley's game was and why she'd chosen me as her target, and second, I was going to make sure everyone in our mutual social circle knew the truth before her lies could do any more damage to my family. The truth came out in the most unexpected way possible, through Sophia's guilty conscience and a chance encounter at the coffee shop where Riley used to drag me for overpriced lattes she never offered to pay for. I was grabbing Emma's favorite decaf when Sophia appeared beside me, looking like she hadn't slept in days. "No, we need to talk," she said, glancing around nervously. "About Riley and what she's been telling everyone." We sat in the corner booth where Riley used to hold court during our relationship, complaining about her job while expecting me to fund her lifestyle, and Sophia dropped a confession that explained everything. "Riley knows you're not the father," she said quietly, unable to meet my eyes. "She's known the whole time. The baby's father is this guy Justin she's been seeing for over a year. He's married, works in finance, drives one of those expensive BMWs she's always posting pictures with." The timeline clicked into place immediately. All those work events Riley had attended during our last few months together, the mysterious income that allowed her to upgrade her wardrobe despite claiming to be broke, the way she'd become increasingly critical of my boring lifestyle right before she left. "So why drag me into this?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "Justin's been pressuring her to get an abortion. Says the pregnancy will ruin his marriage and his career." Riley panicked when he basically abandoned her, and she started thinking about who else might step up. Sophia's voice got smaller. "She said you were always responsible, always took care of things. That you and Emma looked so stable and happy that you'd probably want to do the right thing, even if the baby wasn't yours." The calculated nature of it took my breath away. Riley hadn't reached out because she missed me or because she genuinely believed I might be the father. She'd targeted me specifically because she thought my character made me exploitable. She'd looked at my relationship with Emma, seen our stability and happiness, and decided that made us perfect marks for her manipulation. "There's more," Sophia continued, looking increasingly uncomfortable. "Riley's been telling people that you and she were trying to work things out, that Emma was just a rebound relationship you started to make Riley jealous. She said you'd been promising to leave Emma once you figured out your feelings." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. How many people has she told this story to? Everyone, Noah. Our entire friend group from college thinks you got Riley pregnant and then abandoned her for Emma. She's been playing the victim, saying you changed your phone number to avoid responsibility. Armed with this information, I decided to force Riley's hand. I texted her from Emma's phone, pretending to be a mutual friend who'd heard about the situation and wanted to help mediate. Riley agreed to meet, probably thinking she'd found another ally in her campaign to manipulate me into taking responsibility for Justin's child. We met at the same restaurant where she'd broken up with me 8 months earlier, telling me I was too comfortable with mediocrity to give her the life she deserved. She walked in looking terrible, exhausted, desperate, wearing an expensive dress that didn't fit her properly anymore. "I knew you'd come around," she said, sitting down with obvious relief. "I knew you wouldn't just abandon me." "Riley, I know about Justin." Her face went completely white. "I know he's the father. I know you've been lying to everyone about our relationship timeline. I know you specifically chose me because you thought I'd be easy to manipulate." She tried to deny it at first, then switched to tears, then anger. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under. Justin won't even acknowledge the baby exists. My parents are furious. I needed someone who would step up and do the right thing. The right thing would be telling people the truth about who the actual father is. Nobody would respect me if they knew I got pregnant by a married man. You have Emma, you have your perfect little life planned out. What's one more child to someone like you?" The entitlement was breathtaking. She'd convinced herself that my stability and happiness meant I owed her something, that my relationship with Emma was somehow less valuable than her reputation management. "Riley, I'm not going to pretend to be your baby's father to save your social standing." That's when she completely broke down, admitting that Justin had threatened to destroy her photography business if she named him publicly, that she'd already lost several clients who'd heard rumors about her situation. "Please," she begged, "just until the baby's born. Just let people think it might be yours until I figure something else out." Looking at her across that table, desperate and manipulative even in her confession, I realized I felt nothing but pity for someone who'd made such consistently terrible choices and expected other people to fix the consequences. Walking away from that restaurant, I could have taken the high road, quietly distanced myself, let Riley figure out her own mess, focused on my growing family with Emma. But something about the calculated way she tried to destroy my reputation while manipulating our entire friend group made me realize that silence would be seen as admission of guilt. Riley had weaponized our social circle against me based on lies, and I wasn't going to let that stand unchallenged. That evening, I sat down with Emma and proposed something that initially made her uncomfortable: a public paternity reveal party for our actual daughter. "I know it sounds confrontational," I explained, "but Riley has spent weeks telling everyone I abandoned my pregnant ex-girlfriend for you. Our friends are judging us based on lies, and I want to set the record straight in a way that makes the truth impossible to ignore." Emma was 7 months pregnant and dealing with enough stress without adding social drama, but she understood that Riley's lies were affecting both our reputations. "What exactly are you planning?" she asked, her hand resting on her belly where Lily was currently practicing her kicking skills. "A party where we announce Lily's gender and celebrate our pregnancy, while simultaneously presenting documented proof that Riley's timeline doesn't add up and that she's admitted to lying about my involvement." I called Lucas the next morning and laid out my plan. As a lawyer, he was initially skeptical about anything that could be construed as public humiliation, but when I showed him the screenshots of Riley's harassment and the witness statements from Sophia, his tune changed completely. "She's been engaging in a defamation campaign," he said with professional satisfaction. "We can absolutely protect you from that legally." Lucas drafted a cease and desist letter that would be delivered to Riley the day before our party, legally prohibiting her from making any further false claims about my paternity or our relationship timeline. The letter outlined the evidence we'd gathered of her harassment, included testimony from Sophia about Riley's admissions, and made it clear that any further attempts to involve me in her pregnancy would result in legal action for harassment and defamation. I spent the next week planning what would become legendary among our friend group as the most strategic party in relationship history. Emma and I sent invitations to everyone in our mutual social circle, promising to address recent rumors and celebrate our growing family. The invitation was perfectly ambiguous. People who believed Riley's story probably thought I was finally going to acknowledge my responsibilities, while people who suspected something was off were curious to see how I'd handle the situation. The decorations were pink and blue, standard for any gender reveal, but I'd also prepared a presentation that would make Riley's lies impossible to maintain. I printed out a timeline showing our breakup date, the start of my relationship with Emma, and Emma's pregnancy announcement, all with social media posts and witness confirmation. I had screenshots of Riley's conflicting stories to different people, Sophia's signed statement about Riley's admission, and even security camera footage from my workplace showing Riley's harassment campaigns. Emma initially worried we were being too vindictive, but I explained that this wasn't about revenge, it was about truth and protecting our family's future from ongoing manipulation. Riley chose to make this public when she started spreading lies to our friends. I told Emma as we arranged photo evidence on poster boards. I'm just making sure the public gets accurate information. The night before the party, Lucas served Riley with the legal documents at her apartment. According to his report, she'd initially tried to argue that she'd never made false claims, then switched to saying she'd been confused about the timeline, and finally resorted to tears and promises to stay away from us completely. She kept asking if she could still come to the party, Lucas told me with obvious amusement. I explained that showing up after receiving a cease and desist for harassment probably wasn't her best legal strategy. Saturday arrived with perfect weather for what I'd privately started calling Operation Truth Bomb. Emma looked radiant in a blue dress that showed off her pregnancy glow, and our backyard was filled with friends who'd been quietly choosing sides for weeks without knowing the actual facts. I watched people's faces as they arrived, trying to gauge who believed Riley's story and who had their doubts, knowing that by the end of the afternoon, everyone would have the same information to work with. The party started like any normal gender reveal, friends mingling, eating barbecue, speculating about baby names while Emma and I played the part of excited, expectant parents. But I could feel the underlying tension as people who'd heard Riley's version of events tried to reconcile her story with the obvious happiness and stability of my relationship with Emma. About an hour in, I called everyone together for what they assumed would be the standard balloon release or cake cutting to reveal our baby's gender. Instead, I stood up with Emma beside me and began what would become the most satisfying presentation of my entire life. Thank you all for coming to celebrate our pregnancy and to help us clear up some recent confusion about my personal life, I began, watching faces in the crowd shift from celebration mode to curious attention. Emma and I are thrilled to announce that we're expecting a daughter, Lily, who will be born in about 2 months. The cheers were genuine but subdued. People could sense there was more coming. Unfortunately, some of you have heard stories about my involvement in another pregnancy situation, and Emma and I want to address those claims directly because they're affecting our friendships and our family's reputation. I pulled out the first poster board, showing a clear timeline of my relationship history. Emma and I started dating 6 months ago, 3 months after my relationship with Riley ended. Our pregnancy was announced 2 months ago, and Lily is due in 8 weeks. These dates are all documented and verifiable. The crowd was completely silent now, everyone doing the math and realizing that Riley's claims about recent involvement made no sense. Then I brought out Sophia, who'd agreed to attend and set the record straight publicly. Sophia has something to share about conversations she's had with Riley regarding the actual father of Riley's baby. Sophia looked uncomfortable but spoke clearly. Riley told me directly that Noah is not the father of her child. The actual father is a man named Justin who she's been seeing for over a year. Riley asked me to help convince Noah to take responsibility because she thought he would be easier to manipulate than pursuing Justin for support. The reaction was immediate and explosive: gasps, angry muttering, people pulling out their phones to check Riley's social media posts with this new information. But I wasn't finished. I displayed screenshots of Riley's contradictory messages, her workplace harassment documented by building security, and the legal cease and desist letter Lucas had served her the previous evening. Riley has been systematically lying to our friend group about our relationship timeline, creating false narratives about my character, and harassing Emma and me at work and home. Yesterday, she admitted to me directly that she chose to target me because she thought my stable relationship would make me an easy mark for manipulation. Our friend Dave, who'd apparently been one of Riley's most vocal supporters, stood up looking furious. "Noah, If this is all true, then Riley has been making us complicit in harassing you and Emma. She had me convinced you were a deadbeat who abandoned a pregnant woman. She convinced a lot of people of that, I replied. Which is exactly why we're having this conversation publicly instead of privately. Riley weaponized our friendships based on lies, and everyone deserves to know the actual facts. That's when Riley herself appeared at our back gate. Despite the legal warning, despite being explicitly told not to contact us, she'd apparently decided to crash the party and try to salvage whatever remained of her manipulation campaign. Lucas, who'd been waiting for exactly this possibility, immediately stepped forward with his phone recording. Riley, you've been served with a cease and desist order prohibiting contact with Noah and Emma. Your presence here constitutes harassment and violation of that legal document. Riley looked around at the crowd of our friends, all staring at her with expressions ranging from anger to disappointment to pure disgust. She tried to speak, probably planning some last-ditch emotional appeal, but Lucas cut her off. Anything you say can be used as evidence of continued harassment. I strongly recommend you leave immediately. She stood there for another moment, realizing that her lies had been completely exposed and that no one was going to support her version of events anymore, then turned and walked away without saying a word. The party resumed with a completely different energy. Instead of hidden tensions and whispered judgments, our friends rallied around Emma and me with genuine support and apologies for doubting us. The actual gender reveal, when we finally got to it, felt like a celebration of truth and family rather than just another social media moment. The digital fallout from our paternity party was swift and absolutely devastating for Riley's carefully constructed victim narrative. Within hours, our friends were sharing their own screenshots of Riley's contradictory stories, comparing the lies she'd told different people and exposing the full scope of her manipulation campaign across social media platforms. Emma's pregnancy announcement posts, which had been receiving mixed reactions due to Riley's influence, suddenly flooded with supportive comments and apologies from people who realized they'd been manipulated into judging us unfairly. Meanwhile, Riley's social media presence became a disaster zone as people who now knew the truth began commenting on her posts with questions she couldn't answer without further incriminating herself. She'd posted ultrasound photos with captions like, "Some people walk away when things get difficult," and "A real man would step up for his child." But now the comment sections filled with responses like, "Didn't you admit Noah isn't the father?" and "What happened to taking responsibility for your own choices?" The most satisfying development came when several mutual friends shared screenshots of private messages Riley had sent them, each containing a different version of her story depending on what she thought they wanted to hear. To our friend Marcus, she'd claimed I was in denial about the pregnancy and needed an intervention from male friends. To our friend Jessica, she'd painted herself as a victim of emotional abuse who was protecting her unborn child from an unstable father. To Dave, she'd suggested that Emma was a manipulative rebound who was keeping me from my responsibilities. The contradictions were so obvious when displayed side by side that even people who'd been sympathetic to Riley started questioning everything else she'd ever told them. But the real karma came when word of Riley's behavior reached her professional network. Photography is a reputation-based business where trust and reliability are everything, and several of her potential clients had been following the social media drama through mutual connections. I discovered this when my coworker Jake mentioned that his sister, who'd been considering hiring Riley for her wedding, had decided to go with someone else after hearing about Riley's personal drama. Within 2 weeks, Riley lost 3 significant contracts as word spread through the local photography community that she had credibility issues and a tendency toward manipulative behavior. The most dramatic development involved Justin, the actual father of Riley's baby. Apparently, faced with the possibility that Riley might expose their affair publicly out of desperation, he made a preemptive strike and confessed everything to his wife. According to the gossip network that Lucas had tapped into through his legal connections, Justin's wife immediately filed for divorce and demanded a paternity test to establish his financial obligations for child support. Justin, who had been pressuring Riley to terminate the pregnancy to protect his secret, suddenly found himself facing public exposure, divorce proceedings, and 18 years of financial responsibility for a child he tried to pretend didn't exist. The irony was perfect. Riley's attempt to manipulate me into taking responsibility for Justin's child had backfired so spectacularly that Justin was now facing consequences he'd been desperately trying to avoid. Riley's response to this complete collapse of her manipulation campaign was to double down on victimhood with increasingly desperate social media posts. She shared ultrasound images with captions about being abandoned by everyone and learning who her real friends were, but the comments were now filled with people who knew the actual story. Her attempts to garner sympathy backfired as former supporters pointed out that she'd brought her isolation on herself through lies and manipulation. The digital paper trail I'd carefully documented became crucial when Riley, in a last-ditch effort to maintain some control, threatened to sue me for defamation. Her lawyer, after reviewing the evidence Lucas had compiled, apparently told her she had no grounds for any legal action whatsoever. In fact, we had strong grounds for a harassment claim against her if she continued her attempts at contact or public statements about our supposed relationship. Emma and I watched this digital implosion from the comfortable distance of people who'd told the truth and documented everything properly. Our social media feeds filled with genuine support and excitement about Lily's upcoming arrival, while Riley's became increasingly isolated and bitter. The contrast was stark. Emma's posts about nursery preparation and pregnancy milestones received dozens of supportive comments from friends who were genuinely happy for us, while Riley's posts about her pregnancy received only generic likes from distant acquaintances who probably didn't know the full story. The most telling moment came when Riley posted a long, rambling statement trying to explain her behavior and asking for forgiveness from the people she'd unintentionally misled. The post was a masterpiece of non-apology language. She was sorry people had misunderstood her situation, sorry that miscommunications had caused problems, but never actually admitted to deliberately lying or attempting manipulation. The response from our friend group was unanimous silence. No supportive comments, no offers to help, just the digital equivalent of people walking away from someone who'd proven themselves untrustworthy. Emma and I realized we'd not only protected our reputation and relationship from Riley's manipulation, but we'd also provided our entire social circle with a masterclass in recognizing and responding to toxic behavior that would probably influence how they handled similar situations in the future. 6 months later, as I write this while watching Emma feed our healthy, beautiful daughter Lily in our peaceful living room, Riley's manipulation attempt feels like something that happened to a different person in a different lifetime. Lily arrived right on schedule, a perfect 7 pounds and 3 ounces of proof that some things in life actually go according to plan when you're with the right person. The legal protections Lucas put in place have held perfectly. Riley hasn't attempted any contact since the party, and according to mutual friends, she's been forced to publicly acknowledge Justin as the father and pursue him for child support through increasingly messy court proceedings. The contrast between our quiet family happiness and the chaos Riley created in her own life has become a source of cautious satisfaction rather than active revenge. Emma's recovery from childbirth was smooth, and watching her transition into motherhood has been like seeing someone step into a role they were born to play. She approaches parenting with the same thoughtful competence she brings to her nursing career, researching everything thoroughly but never letting anxiety override her natural instincts. Our friends have become an extended family support system, with several couples asking us for advice about handling relationship drama and boundary setting based on how we managed the Riley situation. Dave, who'd initially believed Riley's story, has become one of our most loyal supporters and frequently jokes that our paternity party should become a template for anyone dealing with false accusations or manipulation campaigns. "You turned getting attacked into throwing the best party of the year," he told me while holding Lily during her first birthday celebration. That takes some serious strategic thinking. The experience taught both Emma and me valuable lessons about the importance of documentation, legal protection, and refusing to engage with manipulative behavior on the manipulator's terms. We've become much more intentional about our social media presence, more careful about sharing personal information, and more confident in our ability to protect our family from people who see others as resources to be exploited rather than relationships to be cherished. Riley eventually moved to a different city, apparently unable to rebuild her reputation locally after the truth about her manipulation campaign became widely known. Her photography business never recovered from the professional damage, and according to the last update from Sophia, She's working in retail while dealing with single motherhood and an ongoing legal battle with Justin over child support and custody arrangements. I don't wish failure on anyone, but I also don't feel responsible for the consequences of choices she made entirely on her own. The most surprising outcome has been how the experience strengthened my relationship with Emma and deepened our mutual respect. Watching her support my decision to confront Riley publicly, despite her initial concerns about the confrontational approach, showed me that I'd found someone who trusted my judgment even when the stakes were high. Her willingness to stand beside me during a messy situation, when it would have been easier to ask me to just ignore the problem, proved that she was committed to our partnership regardless of external pressures. Our story has become something of a legend among our friend group, with "pulling a Noah" becoming shorthand for thoroughly documenting evidence before confronting someone who's spreading lies. Emma and I occasionally get messages from people dealing with similar manipulation situations, asking for advice about legal protection and public truth-telling strategies. We've learned to be cautious about getting involved in other people's drama, but we're always willing to share resources about documentation and legal options for people facing harassment or defamation. Looking back, I realize that Riley's attempt to manipulate me into taking responsibility for another man's child was probably the best thing that could have happened to my relationship with Emma. It forced us to communicate clearly, set firm boundaries, and demonstrate our commitment to each other under pressure. It also eliminated any lingering doubts about whether I'd chosen the right partner. Emma's grace under fire and unwavering support proved that I'd found someone who would stand with me through any challenge life might throw at us. Today, Lily is crawling everywhere and babbling constantly, Emma is considering returning to work part-time, and I've been promoted to senior analyst with a salary that allows us to start looking at houses. Our life is exactly the kind of stable, planned, thoroughly considered future that Riley once criticized as boring. From our perspective, boring looks a lot like happiness.